Social and analytics. Does social media opinion matter? I am Elizabeth Breese, Senior Content and Digital Marketing Strategist at Crimson Hexagon. Crimson Hexagon is a social media analytics company right here in Boston. We also have a team in the UK. And we are really pleased to put on this panel today with 4 esteemed panelists, including Mitch Brooks, who works at Crimson Hexagon, Richard Ng, Sean Rusinko, and Guen Yi. They will all introduce themselves in just a moment. Before we launch into it, I wanted to ask how many of you use some sort of social media analytics or listening currently in your job? It's actually a lot of hands. We ask this question a lot, and sometimes even in sort of social media crowds, we don't see as many hands, so this is great. I think we'll have a really good conversation today. I'm going to sort of moderate the hour. I wanted to lay out the agenda in order for you guys to know what's coming up next and hopefully to make it a bit interactive. So we'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they use social media analytics and how they think about it. And then we'll go through a couple of the problems that we identified. I had each of them send me a few ideas and a few slides ahead of time, and then I sort of put it all together. And it turned out to be really easy to do that because a few very specific themes emerged. So we'll go through the problem of quality and talking about how to get valuable insights from social media, the problem of disparate systems and the unique issue that that presents to marketers, and then how the future might look with a holistic view of the consumer and of the sort of marketing process. Then I'll have Sean and Richard talk a little bit about future opportunities that they see in this space. Then we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between enterprise or the business side, agencies, and technology, as that's sort of the 3 realms that we represent and that I think often make up the relationships in the social media analytics space. And then we'll reserve time for discussion at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Rusinko, Vice President of Strategy at Verndale. Verndale is an experience technology company. We're based here in Boston. Essentially, we're helping our clients build interactive solutions through the web, through mobile, through all different channels, and integrate it onto different technology platforms. So we work a lot in the digital marketing technology space with a lot of different platforms. We are essentially working with clients when it comes to social, really from 2 different angles. One, using social data to understand more about the user for targeting purposes, content personalization, lead nurturing, and overall attribution in reporting. And also from really the kind of the foundation for the conversation today for reporting and trends and social listening purposes. So we're really working with clients to understand how we can leverage the data from systems like social listening platforms like a Crimson Hexagon to really complete that full view of the customer. Understand how trends are affecting the overall buying process, the user journey, which touch points should be weighted more than others, and how that gets done technically, whether it's through data warehousing, through pulling all information into a data cube for reporting purposes, building that type of business intelligence for customers. We're seeing more and more that standalone and just kind of the silo view of different data sources from different digital marketing campaigns is not something that today's CMO wants to see. They essentially want to know how much business value is being delivered to the business from these different channels, and that requires bringing all of the data together. So We'll be talking about kind of really the limitations and the opportunities for that single user view, leveraging social data, as well as just kind of that high-level themes, listening and reporting today.
Mitch, you're up.
Oh, geez. Well, I'm Mitch Brooks. I'm a senior research strategist at Crimson Hexagon. On that slide that Liz helped me put together, there's a lot of things listed there, but I think essentially what I do is try to advocate for important things that are maybe not urgent and make sure that those kind of get a voice of the organization so we can think kind of critically about where the industry is going in the future and make sure to develop new technologies that can be incorporated into our software to help people like our customers gain deeper insight into social media conversation, measure what's valuable.
Hi, everybody. I'm Guen Yi. I was the VP of Analytics Insights for Walt Disney Studios. I'm currently the head of analytics for a company called Zulily.com, which is a mom and family-focused e-commerce website. We offer clothing and apparel, hard goods, soft goods for 50 to 70% off. So obviously we're using analytics very heavily in that space for e-commerce. But I think the crux of the conversation today is going to be around social media and how we used it at Walt Disney Studios. Obviously, with the marketing of motion pictures and DVD, Blu-ray releases, we look at all channels, and social being obviously an emerging one is something that we dug into very deeply. Prior to Walt Disney Studios, I led the analytics team for Parks and Resorts Online. Again, that was probably about 6-7 years ago, so social media in that space was starting to emerge. I think the use cases, again, from a social media standpoint, what we used at the studios were, to really get that immediate, feedback, that, insight from, when we launch an event could be a poster release, a trailer launch, a Super Bowl ad. So really use these tools to extract all the information that people are talking about, try to clear out the noise and really get into the media information that we can then pass along to our marketing teams, our media teams to figure out how they can pivot. And I'll give you a couple examples of those, as we get into the conversation. I think, again, detail-wise, what's resonating with the consumer and what's not. So if we put out a trailer, did Hulk, in the Avengers trailer resonate? And in that case, it did. Did Iron Man? Did Hawkeye? And trying to get an understanding of what necessarily resonated, so then the marketers can, use that information to show more or show less based on what people, wanted, or telling us and what they weren't telling us. I think, trying to understand who the consumers are. So from a marketing perspective, again, trying to understand, what folks do we have and are talking positively about it? Are there folks talking negatively about it? And then again, trying to understand, are we hitting the right audience with the right content? And finally, from a competitive standpoint, because this information is all public, when we do something like a Super Bowl assessment, right, there's a lot of movie ads during the Super Bowl, and obviously folks, are making quite a bit of investment, in those ads, trying to understand, what the return was for those ads. So, for example, I think in 2013, there was probably about a dozen ads overall. Which one got most of the social conversation? Did we expect folks that, got the social conversation to get that? Did we expect, some smaller films that, they did something provocative to get that, strong sentiment, strong volume, strong conversations, and what necessarily were people talking about? So, the good news, I think, from a social media perspective is, regardless of the industry, you can get, a holistic view across your industry of what, folks are talking about, whether, it's your product or your competitor's product, and really try to get an understanding of the pivot, those insights to figure out, is there something we should be doing that we're not, that somebody else is? Is somebody else doing something, very well that we should think about? So, just to generate those ideas.
Hi, my name is Richard Ng. I'm the Vice President of Consumer Insights and Digital Intelligence over at Edelman Digital in New York. I like to say that there are many things that we do, but most of them, to be honest, like the things that I've listed out here, these are things you'll basically find on a website, right? So there's a lot of things we do, and there are things that we are doing or going to be doing. In terms of what we're currently doing, primarily, to be totally fair, coming from a background background heritage of public relations at Edelman, a lot of our focus has been on understanding reach and frequency of messaging, so general resonance and ideas. Part of that, though, and what our growth directions have been is to actually really grow the mandate of what it is to understand something. So we do help a lot with strategy planning and paid media planning now. So why is that? It's that we realize that as, you know, a funny thing happened, you know, on the way to the growth of an industry, in that people started to say, you know, we need to infuse fact-based insights into our decision making. You know, I'm sure you've noticed over the past couple of years, a bunch of organizations, and maybe some of your own, or you know people who are at them, where they'll say, you know, we're going to start using insights to drive our decision-making framework, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's this great idea. To which I would always retort, that's very interesting, because then I always wonder, what were you doing before then? You know, you kind of wonder. It's like, were you simply going on your Buddha check? So the focus, outside of the stuff that you'll find on a menu list from anyone or any Edelman digital office, is that our real goal is understanding. I guess you could say it's the epistemology that lies behind the industry. So, you know, take this, take for example this jug of water. So in this room, we might say, okay, our real objective is to make sure nobody's thirsty. Right? So then you'd have strategic planners go, okay, so how do we know why people are thirsty? How do we know why they thirst? And we'll go into it, and we'll start to understand, you know, what are the drivers and the emotions that they feel that make them feel thirsty, and that's great. And then the paid media people will come in. Our distribution mechanisms will come in, and we'll say, okay, well, how do we make sure this water gets out to everybody so that there's enough cups that get distributed and it's efficient, and how many people will come and get their own water organically, and then how many will need like paid support for their water so that people bring them water, and then how many will virally see water, so then, you know, and then they do that. And on the insight side, we always like to say, well, how do we know this is actually water? How do we know what we're looking at is water? And that really at its core is what a lot of what Edelman, from an insights perspective, is really exploring. It's a concept of looking at something and trying to understand it for what that phenomenon truly is, as opposed to what we may believe it is or hope it is, because our business requirements demand that we believe and hope certain things are true. So I'll chat a little bit about that, I'm sure, as we go through our chat today.
Richard, can you pass the water?
Yes.
Thanks, Richard. So with that, if we pull back to our session topic, does social media opinion matter? I guess the answer to that is it only matters if it's a high quality opinion analysis, something you can rely on, and something that you get value from. And I think that's something that we hear often about the social media analytics industry and social listening is the problem of quality and is the problem of value. And how do you separate, you know, the signal from the noise? And that is certainly a theme that I saw come from the materials that especially Guen and Sean sent over. So I kind of wanted to ask Sean and Guen about this specific pain point that they find with using social media opinion, gaining understanding from it, and then also to ask Mitch to weigh in on it, because I know that this is something that he thinks about every day. So, Sean and Guen, do you guys want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I think, you know, the primary limitation or concern that we've heard from our clients with social listening metrics is that, you know, sometimes just the overall sentiment tracking can be just too rudimentary. And we have kind of that red, yellow, green up there, because those are supposed to be indicators of, you know, what's working well, you know, what resonated, what didn't, and what was negative. For today's digital marketing manager or VP of marketing or CMO, they're starting to, from what we see, require more data, more insight into what type of delivered business value came from a tweet, from a Facebook post, or some piece of content that was activated through any device or for any channel. And it comes down to understanding what those core objectives are. I'm sure, you know, anybody in the agency space here, you know, has had conversations with a client who maybe is more, you know, task-oriented than goal or, you know, objective-oriented. We were having this conversation earlier. Those conversations could go something, you know, with your client around, they're telling me that they want to launch a personalization campaign using social data. We'll say, okay, great. Why? And we'll say, well, because I heard about it at a conference and it's really cool. Or, you know, our competitors are doing it, and I think we should be doing it. Okay, well, what is that campaign going to do for you? Well, it's going to deliver more targeted content, and we're going to get more conversions. Okay, so what do more conversions get for you? Well, it's going to increase sales. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So those types of exercises, those strategic planning exercises where you can identify strategic themes, map those to different digital marketing campaigns and different digital marketing themes, and then score all of the different touch points, all of the different actions, whether it's a retweet, whether it's a Facebook share, so that you can start to build a framework of a reporting and measurement methodology that actually reports on delivered business value than just some of the more rudimentary metrics, sentiment metrics like red, yellow, and green. That's usually where we're trying to get with our clients, and that involves bringing together all agency, all stakeholders, from C-level to understand the vision, what the objectives are, and then kind of the more tactical teams to understand this is how we're going to execute against those. And the business intelligence people to say, well, this is how we can track those. This is how we can weigh, value score, and weigh those different actions to build a more intelligent reporting system. And these are the different systems that we're going to use to really funnel and fuel that data.
Yeah, I mean, when you ask the question, does it matter? I think, the key is, yes, it matters if you're using it for the right use cases. So I think you need to have the use cases going in because, you'll get a lot of pitches of, well, data's cheap now. You can just store everything and, you can always refer back to it later. We went down that path and we said, no. We need the use cases up front. So, the 4 I talked about during the intro is probably going to be the construct that I, talk from here moving forward. But, as long as you have the right use cases and you know what you're solving for, and you know the limitations and the kind of capabilities of the social media data, then I think that, you can convey that to your clients or your internal, customers or partners and, come up with those solutions. So, for example, when we get to the conversation around noise, and again, full disclosure, we are, when I left Disney, we were using Crimson Hexagon. Prior to Crimson Hexagon, we probably looked at about a half a dozen to 3/4 of a dozen tools just to try and get to a spot where we can have relevant information. The noise challenge, I think, was probably about a year and a half ago. We would get some reports from external agencies, and they come in and they said, I think it was, the specific example was The Odd Life of Timothy Green. We ran a trailer, we gathered the information, they came back with a report, and they said, great news, you had something, a few thousand conversations that were happening, and the sentiment broke down, was like, and again, I don't remember the exacts, but like 3% positive, 1% negative, and 96% neutral. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, what am I going to do with 96% neutral? That's noise. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. So we then started going through the couple thousand, conversations, and, it was, hey, check out this here's the link to this trailer. Check it out. It's pretty cool, right? Neutral. Loved the trailer, made me cry. Neutral. And we said, oh, goodness, like, okay, we need to find either a better agency or a better tool. And I think part of that process, led us to where we are today, where, if you know the type of information that you're looking for, so for example, if you're looking for sentiment, make sure you have the tool that's going to give you not 94% neutral, 96% neutral. It'll give you maybe 20 or 30% neutral, so you have a good bulk of information to work with. Right, if you get the 60 to 70% positive, 5 to 10% negative, then you have, I think, those signals that you know what to do with. So you can dig into those positives and say, okay, well, what did people like about the trailer? Who did it resonate with? Are there elements of that trailer that, did well? So then, you can extrapolate that for future trailers. Are there things that didn't do so well, and, who are those folks, directed toward? So I think, that's one of the challenges that are out there, and I think that it'll continue to be a challenge because, when I think these companies look at tools broadly, right, it's to try and maximize scale. But, when you focus on industry specific, right, you need to have a tool that's flexible enough, to have the algorithms that'll start doing the bucketing, but then at the same time, from a sentiment standpoint, you need something flexible so, your own team or someone, with that institutional knowledge can go in and say, you know what, badass isn't negative. When people talk about badass to a movie, like, that's positive, right? Or it made me cry, the trailer made me cry. That's actually a positive thing. That's not a neutral or negative thing. So I think that, it continues to evolve, and that's what we want to see.
Mitch.
Yes.
I know that this is something that you think a lot about, and you gave me this next slide. So do you want to talk about how you think about developing methodologies and technologies that can support sort of context-specific social media inquiries?
Yeah, definitely. So, first I have to say that it's so gratifying to be on a panel like this because I usually don't get to talk to our customers unless something is going wrong. And so hearing when people are approaching these questions the right way is really great to hear. And I think this notion of context is really important, where I find that that people doing social media analytics really struggle when they determine kind of a specific metric that they're going to use as their objective function across kind of any analysis that they do. And then they'll spend a lot of time and a lot of money setting up analyses across different verticals, different demographics, different industries, and then use that same methodology in every single one. And then they'll say, okay, well, so positive for this one is higher than positive for that one, so that line of business is doing better. Where comparing an automobile geared toward young people versus Buick, like the way people are talking about those things, the way they express value, the way they express what they're looking for in a automobile experience is going to be very different across brands. And to create methodologies that ignore that context can be really dangerous, particularly if then decisions are made based on that data. And this slide that I put together is, I was reading articles about kind of changes to standardized testing in New York. And I go, wow, this is actually a really good analogy for what happens in social media analytics, where, say, someone changes methodologies and they say, oh, well, negative went up 10%. Why did negative go up? It's like, well, no, negative didn't go up. You changed the way that you were measuring that. And really, it's important to make sure that when we think about what we're measuring and then what actions we take as a result of that measurement, that doesn't kind of corrupt the reason that we were measuring it in the first place. So if, for example, I've determined that, well, depending on the number of retweets that the tweet about my movie gets, that's how we now allocate marketing spend, because we see that as an indicator of kind of success of the movie. If then I say, okay, well, then I know that if I tweet something about, hey, retweet if you like pizza, and then that gets lots of retweets because that's what I'm trying to optimize, because that's my goal, and I know that I'll get more marketing spend if I do that, well, then your metric doesn't mean anything anymore. And so I think that's really a challenge, is to avoid creating kind of perverse incentives in that way, to make sure that what we're measuring is really actually appropriate, and the outcomes that we're looking for can't really be gamed in that way.
I have a question for the audience. This is a good one because we ran into this use case. So if a post is neutral and let's say 1,000 people retweet it, who would say that that's a neutral retweet? Who would say that it's positive or implied positive? Yeah, so that's an illustration of one of the challenges, right? So if something gets tweeted and it's neutral, and it initially gets tagged as neutral, and someone retweets it, right? It'll 1,000 retweets later, it'll be 1,000 could be 1,000 neutral comments, unless you can drive the flexibility that says, hey, when things are retweeted, it means that someone actually cares about the content, and even though it may be neutral content, folks are taking the effort to share it. And that's something that we had to adjust with as well, and I think that helps solve, eliminate some of that noise.
Really, that question of positive, negative, and neutral is really interesting. Where even if we've determined, kind of every day we come up with new examples of, okay, well, when we're optimizing specific algorithms. Is this tweet positive or negative? And in many cases, it's hard to tell, where it will depend entirely on the context. Where the example we were using before is someone saying, I'm going to ditch Verizon because Boost Mobile is way better, and it's like, well, I don't know. It depends on who you are. And so the idea that there are these objective measures, I think, is something that kind of is always going to be a challenge in the industry when we try to separate measurement from the context of that measurement.
And I think that part of what you were just getting to about sort of allocating marketing spend and the decisions about, or the determinations about where value is coming from, sort of gets us to the next theme that emerged from you guys, which is the problem of disparate systems. Maybe the lack of integration among all of the marketing activities that you're doing, and the difficulty in benchmarking. So we've discussed this a little bit, and I guess I'll just throw it wide open for you guys to talk about the issues that you've come up against, and then the opportunities that you see for what could happen when we can stitch things more closely together. How would we do that, and why?
Yeah, I can start. We've certainly seen the need to connect all of the data from what we're seeing from our clients, and there's different ways to do that. Whether it's a horizontal kind of integration where you're tying all of these systems together, trying to tie all the data together to get that one view of the customer. That's one way, and it can usually be sometimes a very laborious implementation to get that, or there is a more kind of vertically integrated approach. It's a debate that's been going on for quite some time now. Just best of breed versus kind of centralization and consolidation from a digital marketing technology platform perspective. There are always going to be best of breed platforms out there, like a Crimson Hexagon, who's going to do really good job at social listening, break down the algorithm and try to understand sentiment. And that's not to say that we don't want to leverage any of that data to any other system. So we were talking about just the opportunities of just centralized data warehousing, and at more of the enterprise level CMOs and marketing departments, we're seeing statisticians come in-house. CMOs are becoming more focused on math and data, and they're hiring business intelligence people that are trying to tie all of this data together. There's obviously a lot of consolidation in the marketplace today, in the digital marketing platform marketplace today. I mean, with Adobe trying to create that kind of that vertically integrated platform that has everything covered from web content management with CQ to email marketing, test and target with personalization and site catalyst for analytics. That type of theme is playing out across the board with Oracle, with Salesforce, with Microsoft trying to make a play into the space for vertically integrated systems. However, as marketers and people in this room who say they use social listening, you can understand the value in using something best of breed and tying it all in. So something standalone is only going to go so far. But what you want to do is just leverage what it's really good at and tie it to other systems. So that is really the problem that we're trying to solve for our clients on a daily basis, is how this all fits together. How do we get one view of the customer for just overall media buying purposes so we can inform other agencies, for targeting and personalization, for lead nurturing campaigns and remarketing. The idea is that the data you can pull from a social network on a user is going to be so much more robust than anything your salesperson has put into a CRM or anything that a web form has captured through your website. If we can get connection into Facebook or Twitter or any other type of profile where we know just so much more about the user, what they have a family, they have 3 kids, and they like to shop online. That's not data that you're typically going to get from all of the other sources that are traditionally stored in CRM. So the opportunity is huge from just a social networking and data perspective. In terms of how it's all reported, I still think that's where you're going to see best of breed survive. With those those 4 major companies trying to make a play for vertically integrated systems with Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, and Microsoft. They haven't really accounted for the social space. They haven't thought about making an offer to some of these social listing platforms, and that's largely because social kind of spans all of those. Social is content. It's content activation through web content management. It's analytics. It's receiving analytics data. So where social kind of fits in that whole listening from a platform perspective, I think it's going to continue to be best of breed managed, and it'll be incumbent on the marketer or the technology partner to understand how to integrate it, understand how to get it into your cube, into your database, so that you can start to understand what the attribution looks like and how you can start to make more intelligent, more informed decisions.
Yeah, I think that notion of best in breed is really appealing from my perspective, simply because I think that where a lot of people can run into trouble with these kinds of integration projects is kind of through a dream of creating a highly complex system that is also tightly coupled in an environment that is highly dynamic, and that's a recipe for disaster. Yeah. And so being able to have something that's more loosely coupled, where the people are doing the analytics and in maybe with a separate tool or that kind of thing, and then integrating that in a way that is appropriate given kind of that specific context is going to be much more effective.
Yeah.
I think the operating business context of pretty much any piece of information is probably the most important thing that has to get defined. And coming from an agency perspective, I would say it's probably the thing that is almost never actually defined. You know, one of the challenges we face, at least on an agency side, when we look at this concept of integration and benchmarking, is that there are two roles, really, for why we'd use any system, at least in the agency world. One is to try to understand what response was to something so we can learn something about a consumer. We're building a profile, you know, it's like rather than using sight and sound and touch, we're using our digital senses to ultimately create some type of augmented user or audience profile, so then we can then figure out how to ultimately market them things that they don't even know exist and then they now need to buy because we've got that right message planted in them. The other half, though, and this is what it gets used for and why one of the reasons why benchmarking fails so poorly, especially when it comes to larger scale integration, is that the other half, and the half that people don't like to talk about, it's the other half that's just about self-promotion, right? Let's be honest here. How many reports have we all seen? I mean, there's a lot of hands that went up. How many reports go out? How many times does a tool, like, you know, a listening tool get used simply to justify someone's success for an initiative? How many times is it there simply to be a proxy, to be a confirmation that, look how well I did? And it doesn't actually go to teach. It's not used as a means to understand anything about consumer response. It's simply looking to see that there was consumer response because someone is trying to ultimately say, look, I'm doing really well. Give me more budget for my next thing. The moment any organization denies that reality of those two sides of information and try to bring it into a system where they try to then use it to then infer or deduce a larger understanding of a business system, they run a terrible risk of running themselves into the ground, because what they'll ultimately be trying to integrate is a lot of loosely built self-promotion. So in the end, and I would say the best way to figure out what the difference is see if things started off with a question. Did it start off with saying, hey, we need to understand a little bit more about why people buy a certain, why do people want to buy the new, why do people buy, you know, Scion FRSs instead of Subaru BRZs when they're basically the same car? I don't know. Let's go look at, let's explore. But the question, that's a question, right? What people will ultimately say is they'll say, show me how many times people talk about the BRZ versus the FRS. Just show me that, because I want to show how successful my media buy's been. I want to show how great my presence at the Detroit Auto Show was, right? It's very prescriptive, right? And then all of a sudden we get focused so much on these indicators. You know, Bruce Lee once paraphrased Hui Neng, one of the Chan patriarchs. He paraphrased him in the movie Enter the Dragon, right? And he's a master marketer, because if you understand Bruce Lee, he was a great marketer. But there's a very valuable lesson he taught there, right? And it's the concept of the difference between knowing about something and understanding it. Getting fixated on the description of something, which is like where the benchmark exists, versus what it was trying to explain. And he goes, you know, I do it in the Bruce Lee accent, but it gets a mixed reaction from me. But he's got that line where he's teaching a student, and he goes, it's like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory, right? We are in an industry obsessed with pointing fingers and talking about how great our fingers are at pointing at different things, how much they move up and down and around, you know, deltas, and you'll find, like, you know, you use more Latin symbols and people seem to think it's great, but the truth is that they're trying to be proxies. These are all proxies. These are senses that are trying to help us understand a larger question. But once we start to focus on the finger, which is where most systems go when they go into the realm of self-promotion, there's nothing to learn. And in that case, the social media opinion really doesn't matter, and where we fall on our own swords as we try to integrate most of these systems together.
Yeah, I think what we need to keep in mind is, you know, again, it's a data stream, right? It's social data stream, and if used, you know, in the right context, in the right use case, it's valuable. But I think one of the challenges, it's also very unstructured. So, you know, it's new to folks because everyone's used to the structured data, the CRM data, you know, the charts and columns and everything nice and neat. But the challenge of extracting, you know, usable information out of the unstructured data is you need a mechanism to get at it. And that's where, you know, you'll keep hearing the big data explosion, Hadoop, you know, dump it all in, machine learning to extract the information. But, you know, what's interesting is it's not easy. And that's why I don't think, you know, we talked about, no one solved it yet, because, you need to look at it holistically. You can't just say, well, I think the Katy Perry, Part of Me movie last year, 2 years ago, when you got celebrities tweeting, right, it has an impact. That's like an asterisk, right? When you see, 1 billion posts, coming from a celebrity or celebrities' fans, you're like, wow, this movie is going to do like $100 million at the box office. And then you look at the other data that says, you know what, concert movies typically, range between 15, 20, if you're lucky, 25 million. And it opened, I think, around 20 million or 15 to 20 million. So it's interesting, as we think about connecting the different data streams, right, it's one viewpoint. If you can iterate it enough, right, you'll get those learnings and those kind of filters that say, oh, hold on a second, in our case, this movie blew up with 1 million posts. Why? Because, oh, Justin Bieber had something to do with it, right? Or, you had celebrities that were pushing it, and that's why, you got to take it with a grain of salt. And that's where I think, you have to have it, I think, institutionally within, the systems. No system's going to say, oh, well, Katy Perry was in that movie, so when you do the competitive analysis, right, you need to, weight that one down, or, something along those lines. And I think, the arms race right now is for those companies that can figure out, how do I take the unstructured data that says, I can't wait to take my 3 kids to the movie, to go see, Brave, for example, and then take that information and say, oh, mom with 3 kids, they just happen to be in our CRM system, right? They didn't tell us they had 3 kids before, and now we know that, okay, it's mom with 3 kids that lives over here. And, if we can connect those dots, the future of it then becomes we can send more targeted messages to mom and those 3 kids, right? Don't show them Iron Man 3, show them, Frozen. So I think that's, part of the challenge, but also part of, I think, where things are headed.
Yeah.
So I want to keep looking to the heavens and looking to the future, but I guess with a critical eye. So this was also the content that you guys sent my way about what might be the future of a holistic view, right? If the problem is disparate systems, is the solution a holistic view? What does that mean? And what are also the cautions there? I think that we've already started to talk around those a bit, but let's keep going.
We definitely did. I think one of the reasons that you're not going to see all of this social listening data ever be fully integrated into some type of huge data cube or data warehouse for that holistic reporting is because it's so much data, and it's constantly evolving. We do want to get a sense of attribution. We want to understand how different touch points are delivering value, delivering revenue to clients at the end of the day. But when you're talking about any type of impression or interaction with millions of people that is being captured from a social listening tool, one, that's a lot of data. It's a ton of data. And two, it's an evolving space. I mean, it's constantly changing from a user behavior and a social behavior perspective. So trying to go pie in the sky and tie it all together is probably something that I would caution against. I know that that's something that you just expressed, but when we talk about connecting all of the data at Verndale, we're not necessarily saying dump everything into one warehouse and then start doing all of your business intelligence. It's more about understand what it is you're trying to track, what strategic objectives they're mapped to, and then as best you can tie all of the different touch points from an attribution standpoint. If you can layer in, think of a data layer from a Crimson Hexagon or a social listening tool into that type of reporting or business intelligence, to give you some type of idea of how sentiment also mapped to the performance layers. And even if they're those traditional kind of linear bar graphs that kind of could map sentiment and in that data layer that came from a social listening tool, that's a more feasible and a more realistic and a safer way from a data consolidation perspective. I don't know if you guys kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that in terms of the idea that the humans are really good at dealing with unstructured data at a small scale. And computers are really good at dealing with structured data at a massive scale. Yeah. And when you try and deal with unstructured data at a massive scale through kind of an integration project like this, a lot of things can go wrong. Mm-hmm. So I kind of see part of my mission as research at Crimson Hexagon is to figure out how can we take that massive amount of data, that massive amount of unstructured data, and make that something that can be digestible by a person. So it kind of reduce the scale without losing all of the information, and then turn that into useful insight.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And sorry, I'll be quick. So I think, yeah, one of the keys is if you can take the summarized data,
Right.
and put it in kind of this hybrid platform to connect with the other data streams, that becomes helpful. Meanwhile, you take the granular data and store it away, if you really want to do that. So, a year from now, you can go look back on it. I think, but some of the challenges are that a year from now, right, the whole landscape changes, and, you may have twice the volume that you did last year. So it's really tough to normalize, and, the space is moving so quickly that, not many folks I've seen at least are spending time normalizing the historical data. They're just saying, okay, well, just compare it against, current state and, we'll move forward.
So at Crimson Hexagon, what we do all day, every day is think about social and analytics. Does social media opinion matter? How can we make it more valuable? And how can we help our customers find value in social data? And when we put this panel together and we thought about people who we've had lots of conversations with before, Richard and Guen, and someone we hadn't met before, FutureM, Sean, we were kind of thinking like, is this a conversation that we have over lunchtime together every day? And how is this going to extend? And when I got the slides back, I was really blown away. And so I wanted to just give the floor to first Richard and then Sean to talk about the opportunities that they see in the social analytics space, because they had clearly done a lot of thinking about it, and I personally just wanted to hear the voiceover of these two slides. So take it away, Richard.
My team demanded that I put Bender in this presentation. Because I swear, actually, and I'm not kidding, I'm not being facetious when I say a lot of the best lessons one can learn you can usually find from some sort of pop culture critique of culture. It's a big opportunity area. So first, it's just mapping benchmark opinion to actual analysis. So there's been a very, very clumsy merger of market research into this space, and I can say that lovingly because I started off as a market research analyst many moons ago back in Toronto. And quite frankly, market researchers stink at it. They stink at it because the challenge is that market research is based itself on asking people questions via survey mechanisms to get opinions that they then use as proxies to then determine behavior. And there was always a totally separate industry to actually look at behaviors, and there were data miners who were back in the 70s after the acrimonious split between political science and economics when they broke up. All the data miners were stolen by the finance guys because they could pay a whole lot more money. And what happened was the data miners were really focused on looking at behaviors, tracking behaviors to then infer what the driving opinion could be. But see, you actually need to put them together. And the problem is that what's happened now is that the most recent M&As are actually like research shops trying to buy digital agencies, but they're actually buying the wrong people, right? So it's a big problem because the irony is the basics for tracking research for like TV ads, an opinion of brand strategies, like for brand tracking research, could actually be used completely, and you could line them up with most of your listening data to figure out then what are the general like relationships between them. So it's actually still a huge opportunity when realistically, to be honest, it ought not to be. Audience behavior is probably the most useful thing to understand, and one of the big mistakes people make is that they think we're trying to measure opinion or they think we're trying to understand the performance of content. That is not what we are trying to do. What we ought to be trying to do is mapping out audiences that interact or we can say have had some type of impact or been impacted by content they have encountered. And what we ought to be tracking are the actual audiences and their movement, right? Not the content in itself. But of course, and I'm speaking from personal experience, when you come from an agency, all agencies like to say that their content makes mountains move and makes the skies cry. And the truth is that what we're really trying to understand is that the audience that we grow, we're trying to understand the basics of reach and frequency, retention, size, scale. This is the reality of what any marketer would do because it doesn't matter. I mean, what would you rather have, right? 1,000 people saying yay one time and never coming back, or like one person actually coming to your store over and over again 1,000 times, right? If you do it the way that most marketers design things, if we don't try to look at audience behaviors, what we really get is the Groupon problem, which is like everyone comes in, they talk about your product, and then they never come again. You can't make money that way. With this, you can develop really powerful audience profiles, and I think we have to think of digital intelligence as being a product of using digital senses. That's how we start to understand a group, right? Community isn't defined by like membership, we have to realize that what we're simply looking at is, at minimum, a collection of disparate actions that all we can do is say that at one point someone cared enough about something to possibly interact with it, not by accident. Maybe they were paid, maybe they weren't. But when you track those groups, even when you track a basic retention curve, you find very fascinating things. Web analytics has used return rates on websites for, at least since I remember, since 1996 on my GeoCities account. I had a return rate. You know, most Facebook marketers don't even track the number of people that return, engage over time. It's ludicrous, right? These are the basics of audience profiling, and they're fundamentally ignored by the industry, primarily because digital marketing is very rarely even attached to marketing. Often it's part of communications that came out of tech. The organization has built itself up the industry has built itself up in a bit of a funny way, so that it's not particularly efficient. Reduce focus on dashboards at some metrics versus competitors. You know, we learned addition, it was great, it's a wonderful tool, but it's not very useful because you can't actually make a decision off of it. You know, no one makes if you talk to you know, I always say, if we were to be inspired by the types of information tools we can work with, take a look more at like ETS systems, like electronic trading systems. Take a look at the custom widgets you can buy in a Bloomberg terminal, and it will give you an understanding of the types of specific and information people will seek to try to make a decision. But dashboards that are simply that are demonstrating everything as a race. The irony is, showing things as a horse race was a sort of an industry requested desire, like back in like the in the mid 2000s. So that's why people made dashboards. But now what's happened is we're using that as proxies for performance, which is not what they were ever meant to do. They were simply supposed to show very basic things like gross revenue, margin, by salespeople to see if they hit their quotas. That's what they were used for. But they're getting kind of broken down. And last but not least, just a bit more math would be really useful. I've encountered many statisticians and other sort of technical people who are really good at math, but they're very bad at problem solving. And then with that, the reason is because we need stronger frameworks, right? Philosophy is probably one of the most undervalued skills that can exist in marketing, and in particular in digital analytics. You know, the ability to create a coherent framework to help understand, or at least define, why we think people may think certain things is actually a requirement to use any type of quantitative measure. You know, Habermas warned us that the over-scientization of social science will lead us to miss the point, right? We had people coming up with digital democracy indices in the, you know, early 2000s, and how do they do it? They looked at the number of government websites there were in contrast to like the number of citizens. And like, isn't that a measure of digital bureaucracy? But that's the case, right? So that's why I show, you know, a funny bender here. It's like, I'm afraid, the text is a bit small, but it's that time when they do the brain switching, and they have to actually figure out how to get the right brains back in the right bodies. And it's like, I'm afraid we have to use math. And that's a reality. We have to break into it, not because we need to learn a calculation, because it's a way of thinking where we try to solve problems through logic and argumentation. And that funny little curve I'm showing there is one of the funniest things, and here's a practical example. So recently, one of the newest hires on Insights came from investment banks. And he was funny because we were looking at distributions, and I said, I want you to map out every distribution curve of every piece of content we have, and of all the tracked measures, and let's see which ones we recognize. So he comes up and he goes, hey, look, check this out. It's a Pareto curve. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, well, it's exponential decreases over time. I'm like, perfect. We mapped this out, and basically matches every single Facebook piece, every Facebook post's decay rate over time in terms of like interactions over time. And the joke was this. He had a bet with his classmates to show that he would one day use a Pareto curve because no one ever uses it in practical business, right? That curve, with that one curve, okay, you could basically estimate by tracking the number of interactions you have for any Facebook post, paid or unpaid, you could basically figure out exactly what it's going to score. And it's from every Stats 101 textbook. So when people say that you need these great statisticians, you need powerful minds, what you actually need is a good reason for being. Without like a raison d'etre, we can't actually build anything. So anyway, if you can find a way to use other curves, I mean, you know, that'd be great. But in the end, it comes down to that. It's like looking at things not because you're looking at the numbers. What you're trying to understand is meaning. You're looking for emotional content, not just the representation of a figure that we're looking to create.
Cool.
Actually,
we just got the 10-minute warning, so I think we will spend 3 minutes with Sean's system,
I can fly through this. I don't
or
want
90 seconds, and then we'll do questions.
So I tried to throw a diagram up to explain to the group of the space that we're playing in, and I'm giving a panel or session tomorrow at 2 o'clock that talks more about customer experience management, but to try to understand where these kind of standalone systems really rest in comparison to customer experience management. And customer experience management, for those who don't know, is a system that digital marketers are really using to manage all their content. It's evolved from CMS. So they're not just managing content in a CXM, they're managing their analytics that is used for content personalization, A/B, multivariate testing, email campaign, and everything else. From a content standpoint and distribution standpoint. You have users such as just content authors, digital marketing managers, as well as C-level executives who might be accessing it for reporting purposes, because you are using it for kind of that business, delivered business value reporting perspective. And that system is being used to publish content out to many different channels, whether it's website, mobile site, email, social channel. And the idea is that that system, since it's really your content repository, needs to speak to, it's your content repository and your analytics interface, it needs to speak to other systems. So really where social listening fits in is with those other systems like ERP, CRM. If we can talk about bringing in that summarized data, as Guen talked about it, to understand, all right, this is what we're seeing from kind of our CXM reporting, that what is delivered value from a content perspective and a channel perspective, a touch point perspective. This is how it aligns with what our social listening analytics is telling us. And these are some of the decisions that we can make based on those correlations.
Thanks.
It's a very sexy diagram, I know.
So we've talked about systems and technologies, but I think today we've also talked about the value that can be gained from social media data and social media opinion that comes through storytelling and the conversations of real life and finding the sense of question that you come to it with. So I think that what we all wanted to leave with is the relationships that form the kind of triad of enterprise and agency and technology, which the panel represents. And that was sort of by accident, but it's also the relationships that we at Crimson Hexagon really have. We have customers who are on the company side and on the agency side. And we also hear from our customers on both of those sides that they do a lot of thinking about what is the sense of question and that you approach your social media with. And how do you build analyses that will get you to the right kinds of answers? Thank you very much for joining us.